Good morning, everyone. Good evening to those overseas who have tuned in to the Monsoon Twilight event. Thank you to our sponsors, FB Rice, for helping put this together. Just an introduction, my name's Mark Parhash. I'm editor of BioShares, which many of you will know about. It's an independent biotech investment newsletter into its 22nd year of publication. And we're very happy to announce we've got a new dates for the BioShares Biotech Summit, which will be the 11th and 12th of May in Albury. So if you like your biotech stocks, go to our website, and registration's open now, so go and have a look. We'll be releasing our speaker list in probably about a week's time. So we've got two companies presenting today. Those companies are Bionomics and Biotron. So we're going to open up first with Errol de Souza, who is the CEO or chairman of Bionomics. Thanks, Errol.
Great. Thank you so much. And let me just share the presentation with you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to provide an update for you on the Bionomics story. Before I begin, let me just remind you, draw your attention, I should say, to the safe harbor statement that you can see on our website. And let me start off at a high level with just a quick overview. So as you know, Bionomics is an Adelaide-based biopharmaceutical company. We've been listed on the ASX for a couple of decades, and I'm pleased to announce that we did an IPO in mid-December in the US and are now listed on NASDAQ. We are a diversified clinical stage biopharmaceutical company targeting allosteric ion channel modulators to develop small molecule therapeutics for the treatment of both psychiatric and neurological disorders. Our lead compound, BNC210, which is a negative allosteric modulator of the alpha-7 nicotinic receptor, is in a phase 2 clinical trial for the acute treatment of social anxiety disorder. And this is on the heels of 2 clinical trials that we've already completed that show very nice efficacy in terms of the reductions in anxiety. This is also an indication for which the FDA granted us Fast Track designation in November 2021. In parallel with the acute treatment for social anxiety disorder, we have an ongoing trial in post-traumatic stress disorder. This is a phase 2b trial, which started in July of 2021. And I'll give you a quick update on that. This is an indication for which the FDA granted us Fast Track designation in November of 2019. I'll walk you through the markets. These are very large markets, but I do want to draw your attention to one point. We're living in a world where we're experiencing the pandemic, but beyond the consequences of the pandemic in terms of the infections and the hospitalizations, I think the long-term consequences are really in the mental health disorder space. There's an example of one study where about 30% of hospitalized COVID patients could suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, in addition to proprietary development, we have a long-standing relationship with Merck in the US for the development of compounds for the treatment of cognitive impairment in Alzheimer's disease. And Merck has 2 compounds in clinical development for these indications. And behind that, we've got a couple of preclinical programs and a balance sheet with about 40 million to drive the near-term milestones. So this is our pipeline. The post-traumatic stress disorder trial started in July. It's a 200-patient study across 25 centers in the US. All 25 centers are up and running. Again, Fast Track designation, and the top-line data will be in the first half of 23. The social anxiety disorder trial just started at the beginning of this year. It's a 150-patient trial across 15 centers in the US. Being an acute indication, the readout for this will actually be sooner than the PTSD trial. It will be, it'll read out towards the end of this year. Then we're looking at the potential for a combination trial with a psychedelic that has shown value as an adjunct to psychotherapy for the treatment of PTSD, and that's MDMA, and I'll talk about that later on. 2 candidates with our collaboration with Merck and then the preclinical candidates. So let me just walk you first through the social anxiety disorder indication, which is a very large market with over 30 million patients just in the US alone. But the point I want to make on this slide beyond sort of the market numbers is that there is no fast-acting FDA-approved medication for as-needed treatment. So the only medications approved for social anxiety disorder treatment are the antidepressants, the SSRIs, but they're very slow in their onset. So there is an unmet medical need for a rapid acting, which is where BNC210 fills in. This is just a quick summary slide. This is truly a novel mechanism of action. We've shown anti-anxiety effects in 2 clinical trials, and we've got a unique new tablet formulation that has a rapid onset of action with peak levels occurring about an hour, which are ideal. It's an oral formulation, and blood levels are seen for even 6 to 8 hours, which allows patients to cope with most of the day in terms of dealing with their phobias. So here's the value proposition shown on the right-hand side here. So we have the efficacy of the Valium class of drugs, which are the benzodiazepines, in reducing anxiety. But unlike the benzodiazepines, we don't have sedation, we don't have addictive liability, memory impairment, or motor impairment, and we're much faster acting than the antidepressant class of drugs. Let me quickly take you through our second indication, which is for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder, where again, it's a very large market. Up to 8% of adults may experience post-traumatic stress disorder at some point in their life. And the only approved medications, which are the antidepressants, really have very limited value. And so the FDA is really pushing for the development of compounds. Therein lies the fast track designation for us. When you think about the post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a much more complex disorder than social anxiety disorder, where you have, depression, anxiety, intrusive thoughts, avoidance. And time really does not permit me to walk you through this particular slide, but many of the attributes of BNC210 are tailor-made for this indication. In a previous trial, we already showed antidepressant effects. As I alluded to before, we have anti-anxiety effects, we have fear extinction effects, and we've shown effects in terms of reducing activity in brain areas such as the amygdala, the emotional centers of the brain, which are involved in PTSD. We're also looking at a collaboration which we formed about a year ago with one of the Atai subsidiaries. Atai is a company focused on the development of psychedelics for the treatment of psychiatric conditions. Empath Bio has a proprietary derivative of MDMA. And as you may know, MDMA has shown utility not as a monotherapy for PTSD, but as an adjunct to psychotherapy for PTSD. And we're looking at a combination therapy because as an adjunct, it requires 3 intensive 8-hour in-clinic sessions. And we're looking to do 1 session with, for example, MDMA, and then give them BNC210 in the outpatient setting, which may reduce the need for the second and third in-clinic sessions and therefore facilitate the treatment paradigm for the patients. We have a long-standing collaboration with Merck, which was formed in 2014 for the development of compounds for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. They funded 3 years of research, resulted in 2 development candidates. We've gotten US $30 million thus far, and there's still about $465 million in biobucks in addition to royalties. The first compound went into the clinic in 2017, has completed safety studies, and is undergoing several biomarker studies. In addition, Merck has taken a second compound into clinical development in 2020. So there's 2 compounds. Merck's going to pick 1 or 2, and the next significant milestone for us is entry into phase 2 development. Let me finish up with a little bit on the financials, and then I'll talk about a summary slide. we've maintained lean operations. We're going to be looking to establish some operations in the US in addition to our longstanding operations in Adelaide. Our cash runway will take us to the end of 2020. That's including funding all of the 2 clinical trials that we've talked about, plus doing some work in terms of getting ready for phase 3 trials. Our cash position is a little bit over 40 million, and we're fully listed on 2 global exchanges with significant institutional funding from folks in the US like Biotechnology Value Fund that have been supporters of us for years, Apeiron Investment and Merck, and we have lots of retail investors in Australia. So just to finish up here, Bionomics has a balanced business model. It's balanced with proprietary development and an external validating partnership from Merck. Furthermore, within the proprietary development, we mitigated risk for our investors with an acute indication, which will read out by the end of this year, for which we have fast track designation, coupled with a chronic indication for PTSD, which will read out 1 to 2 quarters after that. And then we have 2 compounds in clinical development, fully funded by Merck. And then we have earlier stage programs. So with that, let me stop. Hopefully I've kept on time and left a little bit of time for questions.
Thanks, Errol. I'll open up with what's the fastest path to market for Bionomics, which application? And do you what's the business model? Is it to license it for phase 3 and further development?
Good question. So the fastest path is probably social anxiety disorder. So if the trial that's underway, ends up having positive data, which we hope that it does based on our previous experience, we're currently doing studies that would get us ready for phase 3 development, which could start as early as 2023. We know the path for registration. It would require 2 phase 3 trials, a couple of 100 patients each, plus safety studies that could be done probably in about an 18-month time frame, followed by the toxicology support that would be required for an NDA filing, and then commercial registration. PTSD also would be a fairly straightforward registration trial study where we would be looking at slightly larger trials of 200 to 300 patients each, but no more than 2 pivotal trials with some chronic tox support. So it'll be a little behind, but not much further behind than the social anxiety disorder trial. And then what are our intentions from a commercial standpoint? What we would be looking for is to keep a presence and commercial presence in the US. So that could be a co-marketing presence, for example, in social anxiety disorder or in PTSD, but we would be looking for ex-US partnerships, in terms of Europe, the Far East, in terms of licensing and truly developing a global registration plan in terms of being able to do that. And within the US, we may do, target a foster psychiatrist and even bring in a co-promotion partner, for example, that would target primary care physicians.
And Errol, with BNC210, you've reformulated that, haven't you? How does that reformulation look in terms with respect to the previous formulation?
Yeah, I mean, the previous formulation, as you may know, was limited by 2 things. One, it was a liquid suspension and it had a massive food effect. So it had to be given with food to facilitate absorption. The new tablet formulation completely gets rid of the food effect. So now in our PTSD trials, we don't even tell the patients whether they take it with or without food. It doesn't matter. We know that the blood levels in the current PTSD trial far exceed, the levels that have been suggested to be necessary from the pharmacometric analysis. The other attribute that we got in the new tablet formulation is that it is rapidly absorbing, which makes it actually ideal for an acute indication like social anxiety disorder. So we got a twofer. We actually developed it for PTSD, but the rapid absorption made it really ideal for SAD moving forward with that indication.
We've got time for one more question from Mark Potter. The question is, if you receive positive results in the BNC210 trials, is there an avenue to apply for breakthrough therapy, and how much would that speed up timelines?
A great question, Mark. So we would be able to apply for that at our end of phase 2 meeting, which would be after we collect all the phase 2 data and present our plan for phase 3. So, you know, a fast track designation does speed up your NDA filing because you can make it a rolling NDA, but a breakthrough status is even beyond a fast track designation in that it could be an approval in 6 months as opposed to most likely a 12-month designation. But we wouldn't know that until the end of phase 2 meeting, which would be the appropriate time for us to apply for the potentially a breakthrough designation.
Okay, thanks very much, Errol. We'll just let our next speaker is Michelle Moore, CEO of Biotron. I'll let Michelle get the slides sorted out there. Biotron is developing a number of antivirals for the treatment of HIV, hepatitis, and also COVID now. So, Michelle, I think you're just about ready to go. I'll please, Michelle Miller.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you to the sponsors. Thank you, Mark, for hosting, for comparing, and thank you to Monsoon for setting this up today. Pleased to be able to update Biotron and its activities over the last period of time and outline the work going forward. Standard forward-looking statements. So Biotron is an Australian biotech company. We're an antiviral company. And similar to Bionomics, which is an ion channel company targeting human ion channels, Biotron also is an ion channel company, but we target proteins called viroporins, which are ion channels found in viruses. And these are key for, these proteins found in these viruses are key for not just replication of the virus, but also the actual pathogenesis and the immunomodulation and the adverse immune things that are set up by the virus, all done through this particular ion channels or viroporins found in a broad range of different viruses. So we have a unique approach to tackling virus infections. We have a new class of antiviral drugs that work in 2 ways. Most antiviral drugs just work in one. They knock down the virus levels and that's it. So because of how our drugs work, we not only stop replication of the virus, but we also inhibit the damaging inflammatory responses that the virus initiates and that actually cause the disease pathogenesis. During the last 12 months, our key achievements have been commencing an additional 2 phase 2 HIV trials. And these trials are really key to the positioning of BIC225. We're looking at improving key markers of health outcomes in at-risk populations of HIV positives who are long-term treated on antiretrovirals, but yet haven't achieved full immune reconstitution, and also for eradication of HIV infection. And these trials are underway at sites in Australia at Holdsworth House and at St Vincent's in Darlinghurst, as well as sites in Thailand. And the reason for Thailand is we need a different population there of patients who are treatment naive, and we don't get a lot of those in Australia, so you can't recruit that population here. And also over the last 12 months, the other key thing has been demonstrating that 225 stops replication of SARS-CoV-2 and prevented development of COVID-19 disease in a very robust industry recognized animal model. So just to briefly touch on the HIV program. So I think the important thing to recognize is that HIV program has been going for some time. The eradication of HIV and this area is very complex. We're not following on other people's coattails. The number of people in the world that have been officially cured from HIV is 1, the Berlin patient, who has subsequently passed away. The trials we have done, especially our 009 trial, phase 2, we finished 18 months ago. We showed very positive data that in terms of improved health outcomes and setting up, re-establishing an immune response in patients that long-term infected with virus you don't see. So these new trials were designed in consultation with international experts with links to pharma industry. I should say we've recently, or the last 18 months, put on a new chief medical officer, US-based with experience in pharma, as well as about a decade with Gates Foundation. And these trials have been designed in conjunction with the international SAB to generate really specific data to demonstrate a clear clinical benefit, assessing key biomarkers, immunological and virological, which are consistent with what is required to be seen for regulatory filings. These trials commenced late last year. We expect completion of recruitment by mid-year and aiming to get preliminary results in the second half of this year. And really where we're positioning 225 is there's a need for safe, effective agents that will work in conjunction with existing ART to reduce inflammation and lead to fewer HIV comorbidities and improved health outcomes and, of course, cost of treatment. And also want a treatment that in conjunction with existing ART leads to increased immune system recognition and eradication of HIV. And the data that we've generated in trials to date shows that we are on track to achieve that. SARS-CoV-2 is an interesting one for us. We've been interested in coronaviruses since the SARS-1 outbreak, where we were the first to show that the E protein of SARS-CoV-2 is a viroporin and is druggable. So we've been working in this space, of course, since SARS-CoV-2 came along, generating a new generation of antiviral drugs. We recognize, of course, that vaccines are central to the control of pandemics, but there's an unmet need for effective drugs to also treat antiviral drugs to treat the disease. We know there's an ongoing risk for emergence of new variants. We were lucky with the Omicron strain that it hasn't been as has many problems as it might have despite its infectivity, but we don't know what the next variants are going to show. In particular, problems with at-risk populations, some of whom aren't suitable for vaccinations or the vaccines don't work as well. Either people with immunodeficiency, transplant recipients, oncology patients, and elderly, anybody, if you're over the age of 65, then you're on the list, and any people with chronic health conditions. The US FDA has very clearly stated they want more antiviral drugs for treating COVID-19. Remdesivir is the only treatment that's actually been approved. That's an infusion suitable for hospitalized patients. And really, while it is very good in cell cultures at knocking down the virus, it actually doesn't prevent the cytokine storm and all the immune things that happen and that cause the major problem in these patient populations. And so similarly to HIV, where we've got a viroporin inhibiting drug that works by inhibiting virus replication and stopping the immune response. If we can do the same thing with COVID, we would expect to be able to impact on this disease. So late last year, we tested BIT225, or our collaborators at Scripps Institute in the US, tested our drug in a K18 COVID mouse model. These are mice that have been engineered to have the receptors so that they can be infected by SARS-CoV-2. And here on this slide here, the first experiment we did, infecting mice with the virus, treating for 7 days with either BIT225 or the vehicle control. This shows the change in body weight. These mice are adolescent mice. They're still gaining weight. Mice that were infected with virus and not treated with any drug, rapidly did what we expected, which is they lose body weight because they're infected with virus, become unwell, or the normal signs of disease as well in these mice, whereas the BIT225 at 2 different doses remained healthy through that 7-day period. And when we looked at the viral load levels in the lungs, we saw a nice dose response with no drug, 100 and 300 mg of BIT225. A good dose response and 3.5 log drop of virus. in addition, I haven't shown it here, but we saw reduction in the key immune markers that are indications of cytokine storms, that they were also reduced. We like this data so much, we recently redid it and extended it out further. So this time we treated for 12 days. And as expected, all of the control mice, these are mice that were infected and just treated with with vehicle control, all died, before day 8. Whereas every single one of the mice that were treated with 225 over the entire 12 days, at the end of that time was still healthy, no signs of any disease. And when we looked in the look at the viral load once again in the lung tissues, we saw very good reduction in virus, as well as, once again, haven't shown it here in the interest of time, but in the key immune markers. So indicating that we've had a really significant result in this. I should say that this is really, really remarkable result. All of our US-based experts, we've got a US-based chief scientific officer who's been active in this space, antiviral space, for many years, and working with other companies as well on SARS-CoV-2, has not seen any data at all of this nature. So I'm just trying to move my slide down. So the studies show a clear clinical benefit from treatment with 225. The other really exciting thing is this is not a preclinical program. This is a drug with BIT225 as an oral drug. It's been in several clinical trials. It's got a very good safety profile. We've done tox studies out to 6 months, because our HIV trials, of course, require a lot longer dosing than we need, of course, for this. And not only that, we last year made additional batch of clinical grade material. And while the material for our HIV is all earmarked and packaged away in capsules for that trial, we have another 7 kilos of clinical grade material on hand that can be committed to SARS-CoV-2 trials. We're currently in discussions with the FDA. They have CTAP, the Coronavirus Treatment Acceleration Program, for COVID drugs, and we're in discussion with them. We have a proposed clinical trial, and we're getting feedback at the moment from them to assess the efficacy of 225 for treatment of SARS-CoV-2. Funding for this, we will be seeking from non-equity funding sources and potential partners. So in summary, HIV remains our prime focus. We have good positive trial data previously that de-risked the program. These trials are current trials are set up to really clearly demonstrate to regulators and pharma how the drug can be used to improve health outcomes. And we've got near-term data due in 2022. The SARS-CoV-2 work provides further value for 225. We've filed additional patents, which extend the utility and runway for this clinical asset. And the guidance and the feedback from the FDA are really what we're waiting for at this point. And I'll leave it, our financial position isn't quite as rosy as Bionomics, but Biotron has always run a very lean company. And we raise money for particular activities. We're shortly expecting an R&D tax refund check to land in our bank. Our HIV trials are fully funded. And I think that this year, 2022, will really be a very exciting one for this company. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Just while we wait for questions to come in, I'll start off. What's the path market for 225? Is that you're looking at getting to same question, I guess, as to Errol, getting to the end of phase 2 and then licensing that to a bigger partner?
Yeah, look, that's always been the plan. Certainly for the HIV, we've been in discussion with potential partners and what they want to see. Things we've said, it's a difficult indication because nobody's been able to do this yet. The data we got in the last phase 2 we did was very robust. This is to answer very specific key questions around the immunology and how that happens. And we expect at the end of these HIV trials that it will be licensed to a partner. Phase 3 trials would not be, they're not very large. I guess it's a similar thing to Bionomics phase 3 trials in terms of sizes. For the SARS-CoV-2, on the back of a phase 2, phase 3 trial in the US, certainly on the back of how other drugs are being developed in this indication, we'd be able to get emergency use authorization. So from just one simple trial that we're aiming to do, emergency use authorization, if it works, will be, and certainly the indications are that it will, would result from that.
When do you expect the COVID study to kick off?
The main thing is, well, funding for that. That's why we're in the process now of talking to different groups around that. We'd like then that would start in the second half of this year. You know, what all these things with COVID is an ever-changing landscape. Trying to estimate and anticipate what the numbers are going to be like, where the outbreaks are going to be, all of that is what we've been working on with our US experts. But if we can start this in the second half of this year and get it, because the trials are only 10 days of treatment, unlike the HIV world where we have to treat for much longer, then we'd expect the trial to be completed within 6 months.
In the mouse study, Michelle, I noticed that all the mice died from the SARS-CoV-2. Do they normally die from that, or were they some sort of mice?
No, they do. These engineered mice, that's exactly what you expect. You expect them to die untreated. Yep, exactly.
And why is that?
Why is that? Because they set off the cytokine storm, they get into the lungs, they cause the lung disease that happens in people. It's many of the immune exacerbations that the virus sets off. And in fact, the E protein, which is what we target, is the protein that's responsible for setting off that whole inflammatory process in the lungs.
And just a final question: how many patients have received 225 so far?
So in the trial, we've done quite a few trials over these HIV for 225 for HIV and hepatitis C previously. We have over 180 have been dosed out to 3 months in previous trials, the existing trials that are running now for 3 and 6 months. And we have tox studies as well going out for that. So we have a very robust safety package, as well as PK data and safety data on BIT 225. Right.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. We're going to wrap it up from here. Thanks, Errol, also for your time. Thank you to the sponsors, FB Rice and Monsoon, for putting this together. And just a reminder of the BioShares Biotech Summit. It's back on. It'll be on. The date's been set, 11th and 12th of May. Registration is now open, and our speaker lot will have 25 biotech speaking, and a list will be out in about the next week or two. So just go to our website. And that's it for now. Thanks very much, everyone, for tuning in.